And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Hi there, I'm National Weather Service Meteorologist Peter Chan with your Alaska Marine Weather Outlook on this Thursday, January 9th, 2025. And we start out with the sea ice, which is extensive across the Beaufort and Chukchi Sea coastlines, a few Polinias near Wales, Port Clarence, west of Nome. But otherwise, there's a lot of ice in place. There's been certainly colder temperatures in place across the far north for some time. We've seen the ice grow and expand here along areas of the west coast, especially to the south and west of St. Lawrence Island, as well as in the vicinity of Nunavik Island. And extending a little further south, we've seen some ice growth also down into areas of Bristol Bay. But the concern being, with more of an easterly flow, this ice is going to have a tendency to want to push westward. Meanwhile, we have another low coming up that's going to bring some strong east, southeast, and then southerly winds here to Kuskokwim Bay. There is a coastal flood advisory in effect for Friday afternoon through Saturday morning for this area of the Kuskokwim Bay, especially around Kipnik through Kwagilingok, where could see the water levels run 3 to as much as 6 feet above the normal highest tide when we do get that high tide occur then Friday into early Saturday. But otherwise, weather systems that are coming up into this area and especially along the Gulf Coast are going to be warm. We do have had some ice also redevelop in Upper Cook Inlet, but another surge of windy, mild, and rainy weather is on the way, especially later this weekend. So a series of low pressure systems coming up out of the Gulf will continue to impact areas all along from the Aleutians up to the west side of the state, especially up here through the Gulf. We have one low that's in the process of winding down tonight into early Friday morning. Little leave. The precipitation, the moderate to locally heavy precipitation, will be letting up a bit. Still lingering areas of light rain or rain showers at sea level, mountainous areas, mid-upper level elevation, still getting some snow. Here we have a wound up low crossing the Aleutians tonight, approaching the southwest coast. That's why we have that coastal flood advisory for Kuskokwim Bay and a winter weather advisory for the lower Yukon region, including Nunavik Island and St. Lawrence Islands, for at least a few inches of snow that could mix with a little light icy mix of precipitation on Friday. So if that's not enough, we got another low that's coming up out of the North Pacific, and that'll be impacting areas Saturday into Sunday, and yet another low coming up from the similar region here for later this weekend into Monday. So here's the way the map looks by Saturday afternoon, lingering trough just along the outer Panhandle coast, keeping some showers going. Then this has a big slug of moisture and wind that's going to be coming northward. This is what's left with that initial low that's crossing the Aleutians right now. It's cold enough air. It'll be just mainly some areas of light snow and breezy conditions, but this will be the next major weather maker here as we go through the course of the weekend. And taking a look at the marine forecast on Friday, south winds 20-25 knots for the inner channels, waves 4 or 5 feet, Stevens Passage, Lynn Canal, upwards of 10-11 feet, Dixon Entrance. Stronger winds, Sitka south to off of Craig, westerly winds to 30 knots with waves up around 20 feet. Further back to the west, winds fall off to 20 knots outside of Yakutat Bay to Cape Suckling. And then Saturday and into Sunday, we're going to get even stronger winds coming into the Gulf. We expect southeast to south winds Saturday for the inner channels. 20-25 knots gusts to 35 knot gales there, Stevens Passage down through Dixon Entrance, waves generally 4 or 5 feet. The outer coast, south winds 25 knots gusts to 40 knots there west of Craig, and those south winds turn southeasterly 30-35 knots outside of the Icy Strait, and outside of Yakutat Bay turn southerly 40 knots there at Cape Suckling, building upwards of 20 feet. And then on Friday, for the northwestern Gulf, winds off the Kenai 25 knots southwesterly, south winds within Prince William Sound 20 knots with a few foot waves. For lower Middle Cook Inlet, south winds 20-25 knots, waves 8-9 feet. For Saturday, gale force winds increase from the south, southeasterly 40 knot gales within Prince William Sound through Hinchinbrook Entrance. Outside of that, southerly gales, south-southwest gales, 35 to 40 knots off the Kenai. 30 knot south winds within lower Middle Cook Inlet with waves 8 to 9 feet. Winds southerly on Friday across Kodiak Island, both Shelikof Strait and east side of the island. As we head down along the Alaska Peninsula, winds will increase to 40-knot gales there. Outside there, a false pass with 20-foot waves. Areas of the southeast Bering north of Cold Bay will see 40-knot southerly gales with waves in excess of 8-10 feet. And then on Saturday, southwest gales 35 to 40 knots around Kodiak Island, 10-foot waves within Shelikof Strait, and upwards of 25 feet or so east of Kodiak Island. Look for winds to be south-southeasterly, 30-35 knots on the North Pacific side of the peninsula, and south-southeast 30 knots from Bristol Bay down to north of Cold Bay, 7 to 8 foot waves. The Aleutians on Friday will still see 45-knot gales around Dutch Harbor on Alaska. As we go westward, those winds turn westerly, fall off to 30 knots, and then look for west-northwest winds 25 knots west of Adak back through Kiska and Shemya. And for Saturday, as the next low kind of comes up where I'm standing, you're going to have easterly winds 30-35 knots from Unalaska down through Nikolsky. And then those winds turn more back toward the northwest, 30 knots over the middle Aleutians, and then back northwesterly around 20 knots west of Adak through Shemya. The west coast and southwest. So we have that coastal flood advisory for Kuskokwim Bay, especially Kipnik, Kwagilingok, where water levels could run 3 to 6 feet above the normal highest tide as we go through Friday afternoon and early Saturday morning when the high tide occurs. Southeast winds becoming southerly around 30 knots, southeast to south winds within Bristol Bay, and then easterly flow off the lower Yukon at 25 knots will tend to push that ice westward. It's between Nunavik Island and south of St. Lawrence. On Saturday, winds won't be quite as strong, but we could see southerly winds 20-25 knots into areas of Kuskokwim and Bristol Bays. Winds along out of Norton Sound, easterly 20 knots, southeast winds 15 knots, at least along areas of the Yukon coast, Hooper Bay up to Imanik. Northwest winds, including the Pribilovs and St. Matthew, at 15 to 20 knots. Areas through the Bering Strait and on the west side of the Seward Peninsula for Friday, north winds 25 knots, northeast winds to 35 knots, especially north side of St. Lawrence around Gamble, but there's a lot of ice in place. There could be some further opening of some plinias with those winds. As we go up along the Chukchi Sea coast, strongest winds will be off of Cape Lisburne and Point Ley, northeast winds to 30 knots. And then as we go back up along the Arctic coast, we're looking at east to northeast winds 15 knots from Utqiagvik to Kaktovik. For Saturday, those easterly winds continue 15 to 20 knots from Kaktovik to Utqiagvik. Those winds then become northeasterly 20 to 25 knots with 25-knot easterly winds out of Kotzebue Sound. East winds off the west coast of the Seward Peninsula on Saturday, and then again, still north side of St. Lawrence Island, especially in the vicinity of Gamble. We can see northerly gales up to 35 knots.